We're speaking with Derek Shelmerdine. He's the resident rock and roll historian of the Mop Tops and the King. He's also the author of the book Rock'n'Roll Unravelled. Today's subject is Stuart Sutcliffe. Stuart was responsible for the Beatle haircut, is that true? Or I guess Astrid, his girlfriend. How did that come about?
Through Ingrid, Stuart had become quite involved with the X's, and they all wore their hair in that brush-forward style, and Ingrid cut Stuart in that. He may have been the fourth or fifth Beatle, but he was certainly the first Mop Top.
Interesting. That's quite the legacy. Derek, when Stuart left the Beatles, was it a big deal? Was it traumatic for the band? Was John okay with it, or was he upset?
Stuart's departure from the Beatles was more a fade out than a dramatic exit. As I mentioned earlier, he wasn't deported from the first Hamburg trip. He stayed over when the others went back to Liverpool. This did mean that when the other guys got back to Liverpool, the Beatles were without a bass player. So they got a guy called Chas Newby, who had been in Pete Best's band, the Blackjacks, previously, and for 4 gigs he stood in on bass, but then he went back to college. So Paul took up the bass guitar and played his first gig as bass player on the 5th of January 1961 at Litherland Town Hall.
So does that mean Stuart's bass playing days were over with the Beatles?
When they arrived back in Hamburg for their second residency on the 1st of April, Paul McCartney was very much the bass player. Stu did stand in occasionally, but really after the first Hamburg residency, Stuart's days as bass player were all but over. In fact, that second Hamburg trip lasted into the beginning of July, and Stuart enrolled in the Hamburg College of Art in the June of '61. In fact, that Tony Sheridan My Bonnie recording session, depicted in the Backbeat movie as being part of the first Hamburg trip, was actually recorded in the June of the second Hamburg trip.
Right. In the film Backbeat, I guess you can title that under, poetic license. They played a little loose with the historical fact. In the movie, they portrayed the relationship between John and Stuart as very close. They were like soulmates, possibly. And in the movie, they kind of make it seem that John was jealous of Astrid's relationship with Stuart. Is that fiction, or do you think there's some truth to that?
John's relationship with Stuart was certainly very close and probably quite intense. But I think his relationship with Astrid was based really more on her artistic flair.
Stuart died at the age of 21. I'm not sure if anyone really knows. It was a cerebral hemorrhage, and it may have been due to some fight that happened earlier where he got hit in the head or kicked in the head. Does anybody really know what happened to him as far as Stuart's death?
There's never been any official reason according to the brain hemorrhage he suffered. But looking back on that particular time, the early 60s, there would be fights in most dance halls, most Saturday nights. So it's quite possible that at some point earlier on in his life, Stuart had been involved in an altercation with someone.
Derek, I have a few questions here that I want to go over with you. And this one might be a little off the wall, but do you think that John's relationship with Stuart had any impact at all on the trajectory of the Beatles towards their ultimate fame?
No, I don't think so. He wasn't a writer, he wasn't a singer, he wasn't really he was no Jack Bruce, let's say that. But what I do think is that he had quite an impact on the Beatles' image that was developing at the time, particularly through Astrid and the X's that they were then mixing with.
Okay, so nothing like if he never met Stu, the Beatles would not have happened. None of that kind of thing.
Absolutely not.
Stu's on the cover of Sgt. Pepper. Do you think a lot of people know that?
I don't think they probably do. Still not really that famous, and outside of the context of some early Beatles photographs in Hamburg or the Cavern, I think very few people would recognise him.
He's become more of a myth. The fifth Beatle, the mysterious Beatle. Do you think that's more of the Stu legacy?
I think you're absolutely right, Steve. I think he was in the band about 18 months, but I don't think your average Beatles fan knows very much about Stuart Sutcliffe at all.
Oh yeah, one of the other thing I wanted to say before we let you go, his paintings. Where are they, and what's the current value of the paintings? I'm curious if you know that.
Yes, they sell from hundreds to thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. One sold at auction for $42,000. He's had a lot of one-man exhibitions across the years since he died. 2019, the Guggenheim had an exhibition, and his sister Pauline is very active in keeping Stu's profile very much alive. And in 2016, she organised an exhibition in New York. And of course, the Hard Rock has bought one or two.
Derek Shelmerdine, thank you so much for coming on the Mop Tops and the King. It's always a pleasure. Again, I'd like everyone to check out your book, Rock'n'Roll Unravelled. Thanks so much, Derek, for coming on the show today.
Thanks very much, Steve. I've really enjoyed chatting to you.